There are moments in life when something shifts quietly, almost invisibly, yet with a force that cannot be denied. You may not see it in the external world right away, but you feel it within, like a subtle rearrangement of something deep in your soul. And somehow, without planning it, without forcing it, you are brought here to this message at this exact moment. That is not random. It is not coincidence. Something inside you has changed. And whether you fully understand it or not, another part of the world has already begun responding to that change. You may have questioned what you felt between you and this person. You may have wondered if it was all in your head, if perhaps you imagined something that was never truly there. But the truth is, what you experienced did not originate in your thoughts. It came from somewhere deeper, a place beyond logic, beyond deliberate choice. There is a layer of the human psyche that operates beneath awareness, a realm filled with ancient patterns, symbolic images, and inherited emotional templates. And when two people are drawn together in a way that feels inevitable, it is often this deeper layer speaking. What pulls you toward someone is not always about who they are on the surface. It is about what they awaken inside you. Long before you met them, there may have been an image forming within you, shaped by dreams, memories, stories, and experiences you could not fully explain. That image lives quietly in the unconscious, waiting. And when you encounter someone who resonates with it, the recognition feels immediate and powerful. It feels like remembering something you never consciously learned. It feels like coming home to something you didn't know you'd lost. This kind of attraction is not simply fantasy, nor is it purely projection. Though projection often plays a role, it is part of a deeper process within the psyche, a movement toward wholeness. The unconscious does not only hide what we repress, it also contains the blueprint for who we are meant to become. So when you're drawn to someone with unusual intensity, it is often because they reflect something within you that has not yet been fully realized. They may embody your courage, your vulnerability, your creativity, or even your darkness. And that reflection stirs something in you, not because of them alone, but because of what they represent. This is why such connections can feel confusing. They may not make sense in the context of your life. They may disrupt your plans, challenge your identity, or force you to confront parts of yourself you would rather avoid. And yet, despite all of that, the pull remains. It persists in a way that logic cannot override, because it does not come from logic. It comes from the deeper layers of the psyche, where meaning is not measured by reason, but by resonance. Often these connections are accompanied by moments that feel strangely aligned, as if events are unfolding with a hidden coherence. You meet at the right time, or in an unexpected way that feels oddly significant. You think of them, and they appear. You dream of something, and then it manifests in reality. These moments may seem like coincidences on the surface, but they carry a sense of meaning that goes beyond chance. This is what Carl Jung referred to as synchronicity, the meaningful alignment between inner experience and outer events. Synchronicity does not operate through cause and effect. It operates through meaning. It is as if the inner world of your thoughts, emotions, and longings begins to mirror itself in the outer world through events, encounters, and timing. And when this happens in the context of love, it creates the feeling that something larger is guiding the connection, not forcing it, but gently arranging the circumstances in which it can unfold. You may have experienced moments like this without fully understanding them. A song playing at the exact moment you needed to hear it. A sentence in a book that speaks directly to what you're going through. A chance encounter that feels anything but accidental. These are not proofs in the scientific sense, but they are deeply felt signals. They speak in the language of the psyche, a language that does not rely on explanation, but on recognition. When two people are drawn together through this kind of alignment, it often feels like returning to something familiar, even if you have never shared a past together. There is a sense of knowing that precedes knowing, a quiet certainty that cannot be justified, but also cannot be dismissed. It is as if your inner world has been preparing for this encounter long before it happened, and now, through a series of subtle movements, it has arrived. But this is only the beginning, because the purpose of such a connection is not simply to bring two people together. It is to awaken something within each of them. Love, in its deepest form, is not just about connection. It is about transformation. It calls you inward as much as it draws you outward. It asks you to confront not only what you desire, but also what you fear, what you avoid, and what you have not yet accepted about yourself. This is where the process of individuation begins to reveal itself. Individuation is the journey toward becoming whole, toward integrating the different parts of the self into a unified identity. And often, it is through love that this process is activated most intensely. The person you feel drawn to becomes a mirror, reflecting both your potential and your unfinished work. They show you who you are, not only in your light, but also in your shadow. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the part of the psyche that contains everything we have rejected, suppressed, or denied. It is not only made of negative traits, but also of qualities we have not allowed ourselves to express. And when someone enters your life who touches that shadow, the experience can be both magnetic and unsettling. You feel seen in a way that is difficult to hide from. You feel exposed, even if nothing has been explicitly said. This is why such connections often come with tension. There is attraction, but also resistance. There is closeness, but also distance. Because while one part of you is drawn toward the experience, another part is trying to protect itself from what that experience might reveal. And the same dynamic often exists in the other person as well. They feel the pull, but they may not fully understand it. They may not be ready to face what it brings up within them. As a result, the connection can become a space of contradiction. One moment, there is warmth, presence, and openness. The next, there is withdrawal, silence, or confusion. This does not necessarily mean the connection is false. In many cases, it indicates the opposite. It shows that something meaningful has been activated, something that challenges the existing structure of the psyche. Within this dynamic, another important element begins to emerge. The inner masculine and feminine, what Jung called the animus and anima. These are archetypal images within the unconscious that represent the opposite gender within each individual. They shape how we perceive, relate to, and are attracted to others. And when we encounter someone who resonates with this inner image, the attraction can feel overwhelming, almost fated. However, this also introduces the possibility of projection. When the anima or animus is not fully integrated, we tend to project these inner qualities onto the other person. We see them not only as they are, but as the embodiment of something within ourselves. This can create idealization, expectations, and misunderstandings, but when approached consciously, it can also become a pathway toward deeper self-awareness, because ultimately, the goal is not to lose yourself in the other person, but to rediscover yourself through the experience of connection. The relationship becomes a space where both individuals are invited to reclaim the parts of themselves they have placed outside, to recognize that what they see in the other is also something that exists within them, and through that recognition, to move toward a more complete and authentic sense of self. This is why true love, especially the kind that feels destined, is rarely simple. It is not just about harmony. It is about growth. It brings joy, but also discomfort. It reveals beauty, but also truth. And that truth is not always easy to face, because it asks you to let go of illusions, to release old identities, and to step into a version of yourself that is more real, but also more vulnerable. And yet, despite the challenges, there is something within this kind of connection that continues to call you forward, even when you try to ignore it, even when you step away, even when circumstances make it difficult or impossible to sustain. There is an undercurrent that remains, a quiet knowing that something meaningful has been set in motion. That is the nature of what we call destiny in love. It is not a fixed path, nor is it a guarantee of outcome. It is a movement, a process, a dialogue between the inner world and the outer world. It does not force you, but it invites you. It does not control you, but it reveals you. And when you begin to listen to it, not with the mind, but with the deeper awareness of the soul, you start to see that what you're experiencing is not random. It is part of something larger, something that began long before this moment and that continues to unfold in ways you may not yet fully understand. But you can feel it, and that feeling, quiet as it may be, is where the truth begins. As this process continues, something else begins to unfold, something quieter, but far more powerful than the initial attraction or emotional intensity. It is the gradual realization that this connection is not only about the other person, it is about you. It is about who you are becoming in response to what has been activated within you. Because while your attention may have been focused on understanding them, their behavior, their silence, their presence, something much more significant has been happening beneath the surface. You have been changing. That change does not always announce itself clearly. It often begins in subtle ways. A moment when you no longer feel the need to reach out. A day when you notice that your emotional state is no longer entirely dependent on their response. A quiet shift where the urgency that once defined your feelings starts to dissolve into something calmer, more grounded, more centered within yourself. You may not even recognize it at first, but this is where the real transformation begins. There was a time when your energy moved outward, constantly seeking, waiting, hoping. You may have found yourself checking your phone, replaying conversations, trying to interpret signals, holding on to fragments of meaning in an attempt to understand where you stood. Your sense of connection was tied to their presence, their words, their actions, and in that state, Your power was unconsciously placed outside of you. But something changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. You began to withdraw that energy, not as a strategy, not as a reaction, but as a natural consequence of becoming more aware of yourself. You stopped chasing. You stopped trying to control what you could not control. You stopped explaining what did not need to be explained. And in doing so, you returned to yourself. This shift is not about detachment in the sense of indifference. It is about alignment. It is about recognizing that your worth, your presence, your emotional reality does not depend on another person's ability to meet you. And when that realization settles into the body, not just the mind, it creates a different kind of presence. A presence that is steady, self-contained, and deeply grounded. And this is where something unexpected begins to happen. The same connection that once felt uncertain, unstable, or confusing starts to reorganize itself around this new energy. Because the dynamic has changed. Where there was once pursuit, there is now stillness. Where there was once seeking, there is now presence. And that shift is felt, not only by you, but by the other person as well. Even if they cannot explain it, even if they are not consciously aware of it, something in them registers the difference. Because human beings do not only respond to words and actions, they respond to energy, to emotional patterns, to the subtle signals that exist beneath conscious awareness. And when those signals change, the entire interaction begins to transform. This is often the moment when resistance intensifies on their side, not because the connection has weakened, but because it has become more real. When you were chasing, the dynamic was familiar. It allowed them to remain in control, to engage at a distance, to avoid fully confronting what they felt. But when you step back, when you become still, that structure collapses. And in its place, something more direct begins to emerge. They may not respond with clarity. In fact, they often respond with confusion. They may become inconsistent, reaching out in small ways, then pulling back again. They may test the space between you, trying to understand if the connection still exists, if you're still there, if the door is still open. These actions can appear contradictory, but they are often expressions of an internal conflict, because at this stage, they are no longer reacting only to you. They are reacting to themselves, to the feelings they can no longer ignore, to the awareness that something meaningful exists and that it may not be entirely within their control. This is where the ego begins to resist more strongly. It tries to maintain distance, to create explanations, to protect itself from vulnerability. But beneath that resistance, something else is moving. What they are experiencing is not simply uncertainty. It is the confrontation with their own inner world. The same way you were called to face your emotions, your patterns, your shadow, they are now being drawn into that same process. And for many people, this is not an easy place to enter. It requires honesty, self-awareness, and the willingness to let go of control. And not everyone is ready for that at the same time. This is why destined connections often move through periods of separation, silence, or delay. Not because the connection has disappeared, but because the individuals involved are still in the process of becoming capable of meeting it. Growth does not happen on a fixed timeline. It unfolds according to the readiness of each person. And sometimes that readiness develops at different speeds. But even in those moments of distance, something remains active beneath the surface. The connection does not simply vanish. It continues to exist as a kind of psychological and emotional imprint. It appears in thoughts, in memories, in dreams. It emerges in unexpected moments when something small triggers a recognition that cannot be fully explained. And this persistence is not accidental. It reflects the depth at which the connection was formed, because what has been activated between you is not only a relationship, it is a process that involves the integration of unconscious material, the confrontation with the shadow, and the gradual movement toward a more complete sense of self. And that process does not end simply because circumstances change. It continues quietly, steadily, often outside of conscious awareness. There may be times when you question whether any of it was real, when the silence feels like absence, when the lack of clarity feels like rejection. But it is important to understand that silence in this context does not always mean the absence of feeling. Sometimes it is the presence of something that has not yet found a way to be expressed, something that is still forming, still unfolding, still searching for its place. And this is where your role becomes essential, not in controlling the outcome, but in maintaining your own alignment. Because the most significant part of this journey is not what the other person chooses to do. It is who you choose to become in the presence of this experience. Whether you return to old patterns of seeking and waiting, or whether you continue to stand in the steadiness you have begun to develop. True transformation happens when you no longer define yourself through the response of another person, when your sense of self is no longer dependent on external validation, when you can hold the reality of the connection without needing to force it into a particular outcome. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you begin to care differently, from a place that includes yourself. And from that place, something new becomes possible. Not necessarily a specific result, but a different kind of experience, one in which love is not driven by fear, by urgency, or by the need to be chosen, but by a deeper understanding of what it means to be whole. Because ultimately, that is what this journey has been guiding you toward from the beginning. The person you were when this connection began is not the same person you are now. You have seen more. You have felt more. You have confronted parts of yourself that may have remained hidden otherwise. And through that, you have begun to develop a different relationship with yourself, one that is less dependent, less reactive, and more grounded in awareness. This is the true significance of what you have experienced, not only the connection itself, but the transformation it has initiated within you. Because while it may have appeared as a story between two people, at its core, it has always been a story about the evolution of the self. And this is where the meaning of destiny becomes clearer. Destiny is not about a predetermined outcome. It is about the unfolding of potential. It is about the alignment between who you are and who you are becoming. And sometimes another person enters your life not to complete you, but to activate that process, to serve as a mirror, a catalyst, a point of awakening. Whether or not the relationship takes a specific form in the external world, the impact it has had within you is real. It has moved something. It has revealed something. It has initiated a process that continues beyond the limits of time, distance, or circumstance. And that process is something you carry with you, something that shapes the way you relate to yourself and to others moving forward. So the question is no longer only about them. It is about you, about what you do with what has been revealed, about how you choose to move forward, not from a place of lack, but from a place of awareness. Because when you stand fully in that awareness, something shifts again. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, undeniable way. You become less concerned with controlling the connection and more attuned to the truth of your own experience. You become less focused on what is missing and more grounded in what is present. And in that space, something new begins to take shape. Something that is not driven by fear, but by clarity. And that is where the real power of this journey lies. Not in whether someone returns or what they decide, but in the fact that you have encountered something that has brought you closer to yourself. Something that has invited you to grow, to reflect, to transform. And once that invitation has been accepted, even partially, it cannot be undone. Because at the deepest level, what you have experienced is not just love in the conventional sense. It is a call toward greater awareness, greater integration, greater authenticity. And that call does not disappear. It continues quietly, persistently, guiding you in ways that may not always be visible, but are always present. So if there is something you feel, something that remains even in the absence of certainty, it is worth listening to. Not as a command, not as a guarantee, but as a signal that something meaningful has taken place. And that meaning is not dependent on the outcome. It is inherent in the experience itself, because in the end, what cannot be stopped is not simply two people coming together. It is the movement of the soul toward wholeness. And when that movement begins, when it is activated through love, through recognition, through the quiet call of something deeper, it continues, regardless of obstacles, regardless of timing, regardless of fear. And that is why, when destiny speaks through love, it does not need to force its way forward. It moves patiently, steadily, through the inner world, shaping, revealing, and guiding, until one day, what once felt uncertain becomes clear, not because everything outside has aligned, but because something within you has. And when that happens, you understand, not through explanation, but through experience, that what was meant to find you did, and what was meant to awaken within you has already begun.